All right, welcome everyone to How to Reach the Next Level of Financial Planning and Reforecasting, brought to you by Corporate Renaissance Group. So I'm your presenter today, Thomas Ironstone, Manager of Corporate Performance Management and Business Intelligence at Corporate Renaissance Group. I've been with CRG for about 10 years now, and I've worked on a variety of different types of engagements, ranging from financial consolidation to very complicated and comprehensive budgeting, planning, and forecasting, financial reporting, balanced scorecards, and analytics. The agenda for today, first level, is we're going to be talking about the top mistakes that organizations can make when it comes to forecasting and how that process integrates with your overall organization. The next level up are the global impacts. So understanding that as we go through the budgeting process, but what are some global impacts to consider when it comes to the forecasting process inside of your organization. In the context of those impacts, the next level up is going to be the right levers. So understanding just some examples of different levers that as an organization that you could or should consider when it comes to forecasting. And then finally, because obviously we're a business solutions firm, talking about some technological solutions that could actually help address some of those challenges. About Corporate Renaissance Group, we've been around since 1989, so over 30 years now, and we've helped organizations transform from a financial standpoint to help improve better decision-making across ERP, FP&A, business intelligence, talent management, collaboration, and much, much more. From a solutions portfolio standpoint, we have partnered with leading solutions across the industry, from Microsoft to Board to RapidStart, Tableau, Workday, Adaptive Planning, and IDU Concept. And as a firm, we know that there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to budgeting, planning, and forecasting. And that's really, as experts, where we come in. We can help you understand your needs and help you direct you in the right direction as far as what solution will best fit your organization. All right, we're going to start at the first level. Top mistakes companies are making. A few of these mistakes, as we go through, some of them may resonate very heavily with your organization, and we've seen this a fair bit. So starting off, the first mistake, preparing purely dollar-based forecasts. Organizations, even from a budgeting and planning standpoint, they typically just start inputting budgets by departments, by accounts, and then once they're trying to understand variance analysis as they're rolling forward, it becomes a bit more difficult to get meaningful understanding of those variances. And the same goes for forecasting. So as things are trending up and down, you're asking the business leaders to prepare a forward-looking budget and then update their forecasts when it comes to pure dollars. But while they may have some degree of understanding what the output could be, likely they're preparing all these sheets on the side to help get a build up to a number. And so by just going with a pure dollar-based approach, you're doing yourself a big disservice, because there could be underlying drivers that should be key to consider when it comes to understanding the impact on the bottom line. So whether it's on the revenue side or on the cost side, taking the time to decompose that and making a little bit more meaningful for the business users to start preparing their budgets and updating their forecasts using, say, particular volume metrics. A simple example on the revenue side, thinking in terms of customer and product. And then within customer and product, thinking of volumes and price. Then they can start understanding, okay, maybe volumes are low, maybe that if we say flex our assumptions, so as an example, what happens if we lower our price, will that drive volume? And then at the end of the day, understanding the impact on the bottom line. And then the same goes on the cost side when we're thinking of input costs and supplier costs and things of that nature. So if we're looking just purely in dollar-based terms, again, it can do a very big disservice when it comes to an analysis perspective, as well as the users that are trying to prepare and obviously control their budget. The next top mistake is the slow turnaround for inputs from the business lines. Many organizations are still in the Excel-based world where all these spreadsheets are sent out to individuals, whether it's by email, maybe it's on a shared drive, maybe it's on SharePoint as an example. And we're asking these individuals to go into these Excel models, which tend in some cases to be fairly clunky, even though I myself am an Excel junkie, and I've built some, in my opinion, some very beautiful Excel models. There are many performance concerns, as well as issues with breaking formulas, and even navigating around it can be kind of challenging to the average business user. So with that understanding, when we're thinking about the budgeting process, all the same principles fall in the forecasting and reforecasting process. How are we supposed to ask our business users to update a forecast when the budgeting process itself is so time consuming to get business users to contribute? So this is definitely a top mistake. Ideally, we want to make that process as seamless and as intuitive as possible, so they're able to provide those contributions in a more timely fashion. So this can be addressed in many, many different ways. So, there could be communication issues as far as expectations. It could be the format. It could be how the templates are set up. All sorts of things that mistakes organizations could be making that are impeding the quick turnaround time for the budgeting and forecasting processes. Next is a big mistake is the lack of integration to financials and ERP. Again, going back to the Excel-based approach, if we want to update our forecast models with actuals, we have to, if we're thinking of Excel, maybe we're lucky that we have a link, maybe through a cube or through an automated flat file download or something. But linking that back into the model, updating those sheets, those reports, and maybe even the templates can be very challenging, and it's very manual. So not having that true integration into the model can create a lot of manual time and effort that's spent on linking it in and preparing it, and then obviously reconciling it at the end of the day as well. And then turning that around to get business users to be able to update forecasts. It's just such a time-consuming manual process. And again, we might only be pulling those the actuals into the forecast at the GL level, and maybe there might be some particular volumetrics that you might need as well. But then once you start thinking of this old manual Excel approach and starting to integrate actuals back in the model that way, it's almost a task that seems so daunting that we just never do it. And so that's, again, a top mistake, lacking that integration with the model. The next issue or mistake that organizations are making are the unclear expectations and timelines. So obviously, the past year and a half, 2 years, have been very interesting in as far as the demand has been going around the requirements for ongoing forecasts. So the demand for and the frequency in forecasts has gone up because every month, sometimes every week, things could be evolving and changing. And then business leaders asking for the impact and wanting to get an updated forecast and get business user, the people that are in those business units that are, have their ear to the street with customers or suppliers and know what's going on, and to be able to update those forecasts to get a meaningful reforecast can be quite challenging. And so having an unclear cycle of how the reforecasts are going can be fairly challenging when it's not a routine part of the business process. And very well it should be, because we require this to help run our business and make business decisions. In many cases, organizations, if they're lucky, they might only be doing one reforecast a year, maybe two. However, it's becoming more needed, as we're seeing, to do this on a more frequent basis. So going from the quarterly reforecasts down to monthly or even rolling forecasts. The final one is the largely manual FP&A process. I sort of spoke a little bit about this earlier, and it sort of affects even really points 1 through 4, is that when the FP&A process is very manual, meaning that we're living heavily in spreadsheets, manually preparing reports, manually preparing our forecasts, our budget and forecast templates. We're spending so much time on the administration of it and the buildup of it that there's little time left over for the analysis. So when we think of point 4, where we're talking about maybe increasing the frequency and demand and of doing the forecasts, and then when we think of all the time and effort that goes into it, and when we're talking about number 5, is by the time that we prepare the forecast, where it might already be required to be on our next forecast, and we've spent no time doing analysis or being able to direct the organization. So again, these are huge mistakes, not huge mistakes, but they can be quite critical mistakes when we know that week to week, month to month, things are constantly changing, and we need to have those insights to help the business users, guide them in the right direction. All right, level 2. So we've beated the first, we've overcome the first boss. Now we're on to the next level, which is global impacts to consider when reforecasting and reforecasting. So some items to consider. So from a finance standpoint, when we're hearing from senior leadership, the senior management team, and we're hearing from the various business leaders within the organization, common questions. What does our forecast look like? And I'm sure the first time, if an organization wasn't doing this before, last year, I'm sure they would have been hearing this very, very frequently. So this is something that organizations are getting constant push on them to be able to update the business as far as what does the forecast look like. Whether this is the question coming from business leaders or whether your business leaders within the organization, your senior management, or it could even be coming from the board. The other aspect is the impact on cash flow and treasury. So with things that are changing and evolving, being able to have a tighter control around the treasury function and understand what the impact on cash flow and currency is more and more important. So when we're thinking about reforecasting, we might also want to think of do we have a tight hold on this and understand when we're doing our reforecasts and updating our assumptions and actuals, are we able to actually see what the impact on the cash flow standpoint is? Next is, what levers do we have? So if we're thinking of doing reforecasting, what are some of the variables and components that we could actually consider that we should be reevaluating when it comes to updating our forecasts, updating our volumetrics to be able to see what the forward outlook is? From a pipeline standpoint, so if it's more of a traditional product, customer, project type business, from a revenue standpoint, how are we constantly reevaluating our pipeline? Do we know what's been committed? Do we know, as things have evolved, has that pipeline shrunk, and have we thought of ways to grow that? And so these are things that get involved more and more with the forecasting process to understand what the outlook is from a P&L, and even obviously flowing through to the cash flow. And through all of this, there's been an increased demand as far as scenario planning goes to be able to say month to month, week to week, what happens if X impacts our particular industry? What happens if this particular maybe major client moves elsewhere? What happens if this particular supplier is no longer able to offer us their services? All sorts of things that we need to start thinking about from a scenario planning standpoint and what the impact will be on our bottom line. And obviously that flows through to our reforecasting, be able to do that more frequently, and then from doing all of these efforts, ultimately getting better reporting out of it at the end of the day. On to level 3, what are the right levers to help offset this uncertainty? So when we're thinking of going through the forecast, what things do we need to consider? So first off, revenue. This could also be, if it's a not-for-profit, thinking of grants, donations. So the idea of reviewing maybe our existing customer base, reviewing for a not-for-profit, reviewing our donors or funders, and assessing what the short and long-term impact could be as things change month to month, week to week. Obviously, this is something critical to consider because from the top line, this might trickle down into our underlying to the bottom line items. So based on demand, will obviously have an impact on our need for supplies, as an example. Thinking of capacity impacts. And then even if it's a project-based organization, if there's an impact on, say, demand as far as projects go, the idea of staffing, and are we considering that? So having that hold to understand from a driver-based standpoint, as things flow through the top line, what's the impact as things trickle down all the way to the bottom line? Next up is suppliers. So assessing the availability of supplies that run the business. So again, when we're doing our maybe budgeting process, and even when we flow through to the forecasting process, getting a tight hold on what our suppliers are they changing the rates, those types of things. And so whether it's availability of supplies or changing rates, those are things we need to have a tight hold on, because if we're not assessing that on an ongoing basis, if it's an organization that's focused on the bottom line as an example, and seeing as our suppliers might be changing rates and how that's actually impacting our overall margins, that's something to strongly consider. And obviously the availability of supplies as well. So if we're a distributor, as an example, a manufacturer, if we lack those supplies while there might be demand, even though we have in our forecast, the forecast could be changing again month over month, week over week. And if we're not lining up from a procurement standpoint to know that if our suppliers are able to meet those demands and that we don't have alternative suppliers in place as well, that could very well impact our forecasts and ultimately the bottom line. From a capacity standpoint, again, I was talking about trickling down. So when we think of the demand from a revenue standpoint, being able to staff. So if it's a manufacturing organization, a distributor, if it's a project-based organization, there's all sorts of capacity constraints to consider. And if we're not staffing correctly, whether it's from a services standpoint or you're not staffing correctly, whether it's from a production line standpoint, whatever it is, or even just for not-for-profits, whether it's project delivery standpoint, to deliver on what our donors have provided us, then that's obviously going to have an ultimate impact on our ability to, from an ongoing basis from month to month, be able to understand what our financials look like. So again, this is something that you might not be calling out directly in your plan. You might just be looking at it as a flat dollar number. However, if you don't have those linkages and the underlying drivers in terms of capacity and demand, this could have a very well, you might be looking at a forecast that might not be giving you very meaningful information. So being able to decompose that can go a long way for sure. And then finally, foreign currency. If it's an organization that operates from a sales standpoint, selling into multiple organizations, multiple countries, might be getting donations or grants from different countries. And then on the cost side, if we're getting supplies, say from vendors that are in different countries as well as we might have, say, staffing individuals that are in other countries as well. So as things evolve, not having that built-in currency component into the plan can impact not only, say, obviously the bottom line in terms of fluctuations of exchange rates, not having a grasp on that as well. It could also have an impact on the treasury standpoint. So not understanding the availability of currency and knowing what the cash flow looks like from a currency to currency standpoint, whether it's US dollars, Canadian dollars, euros, etc. So a few examples that ripple into what I was just talking about. Suppliers. So when we're thinking of doing our forecasts and how this integrates into the overall business process month to month, these are things that business leaders could and should be thinking of when it comes to doing their reforecasts. So on the AP/AR side, obviously this has impacts on both the P&L and balance sheet as well as cash flow, is to understand supplier terms. We were talking a bit about availability of supplies, but now knowing where we're procuring those supplies or working with particular vendors as well, knowing what the credit terms are and what the impact is, knowing if, say, as an example, if an organization needs to reevaluate where they're procuring, say, particular raw materials from. Are there different alternatives they could be considering, especially when it comes to changing demand if they need to have a backup supplier, as an example. And on the customer side, understanding what the terms are. Are we constantly, what our collection terms are? Are we reviewing this on an ongoing basis? While we might have an assumption when we initially do our budget to say, maybe 30 days as far as collection goes. However, as things have evolved over maybe the past year, those collection terms might have changed. And if we're not updating our forecast from a cash flow standpoint, this is going to make it really difficult from a treasury function and just general FP&A to understand what the ongoing cash flow is. And this is going to be very, very challenging if we don't have a tight control over what our expectations are as far as when we're planning out the budget, and then for the overall cash flow. From a workforce standpoint, obviously things are evolving. Organizations are kind of changing and pivoting as far as how they're leveraging workforce, whether it's the whole work from home situation, as well as moving to even out of bricks and mortar locations, and then even considering having a more of a remote workforce. Having the understanding of, when we're talking about demand, understanding what the implications are moving to that kind of setup, and then being able to view that month over month and how we're actually leveraging that and what the impact is as well, Maybe there's situations where you might say there's a particular fixed and variable component that we need to consider as far as an example, leveraging contractors and things of that nature. So again, thinking of forecasts, month to month, changing demand, these are all sorts of things that are becoming more and more relevant when it comes to forecasting. Rent, I sort of briefly touched upon this with work from home. Organizations are evolving and changing as well. So assessing lease terms, assessing the use of space, sharing space. And then as we're looking at the forecast, as that might evolve again. So if organizations are moving back to office spaces or maybe changing how they're using those office spaces, is that factored into the overall forecast as well? And again, from a financing standpoint, understanding what our financing terms are with the various lenders obviously will impact the overall forecast. From a project standpoint, this is more from an internal view. So when we're thinking of projects within the organization, understanding what projects we might have had within our pipeline as far as things that we might be doing internally and assessing which projects are critical and which ones are essential to the future growth of our organization. So getting a better hold on the ROI of these types of projects, having a business case process built into the overall planning and forecasting aspect, so that when these projects start coming online and we start understanding which ones are becoming more top priority, as opposed to this being a once a year function, this becomes more of an ongoing rolling function. So understanding as new things become required, having those ROI templates set up to understand what the impact will be and be able to fold that into the overall budget and forecast. And then finally, products and services. Obviously, things are continuing to evolve. Industries have really pivoted as well as far as how they're delivering their products or services to their customer and client bases. So being able to have a better grip on that innovation process to understand what are the new products and services, which ones are more relevant now, and maybe doing more of a review as far as which ones are less relevant and might actually be consuming more costs from an overhead standpoint as well. Lots of things to consider as far as building out that forecast and getting those key points built into it so that you can actually get a more representative forward-looking view of the organization. Now, just to finally wrap this up from a technology standpoint, so obviously lots of things to consider, and then the natural question is how or is this possible and what can be done? So from a technology standpoint, lots of key features that we've assessed as far as that are needs to have for many organizations. So whether it's accessibility, so moving more to the cloud, browser-based, being able to get away from spreadsheets and emails, making it a little bit more collaborative, more scalable as well. Having controls, so as we're doing more reforecasting, being able to lock things down, security as far as who can see what and get the reports as well. Doing the what-if analysis that we're talking about, being able to spin up a different version and be able to change particular rates as an example and see what the impact will be, changing different assumptions. And then, of course, being able to have the business rules and logic built into it that to get you away from the manual Excel-based approach where you might have formulas and everything that you're so worried on are things breaking, and be able to roll forward a forecast without having to spend days trying to get these spreadsheets together, and then being able to ask people to contribute to that. So some very key considerations as far as overall functionality that you should be looking for. And then from an actual software standpoint, we've done our research and homework, and these are a set of leading business budgeting and forecasting systems that have helped organizations that we work with that vary in size and scale and complexity, and obviously considerations as far as their existing software infrastructure. So what would fit well within their business, with their other business systems. So again, there's lots of things to consider here. So we have Rapid Start, which is more of a small scale solution, and then this is more out of the box, geared to SMEs, so with very simple needs. And then you start scaling up to the Workdays, IDUs, boards of the world, which have varying levels of functionality and integration capabilities, consolidation functionality as well, that can meet organizations' needs. And so there's different considerations here as well when it comes to complementing your existing set of business solutions that your organization works on. And so we've essentially evaluated those key sets of functionality as far as why we've selected these tools within our portfolio. Everything from data source integration, drill down capabilities, being able to build out those business rules, process controls, data visualization capabilities, collaboration, obviously key, broadcasting, pushing out reports, and then things like top-down budgeting, being able to build specific templates that are unique to your organization, and then some organizations leveraging the concept of predictive analytics and machine learning. So that being said, a couple minutes left. Obviously, lots to consider here, and obviously there's solutions to these challenges. Organizations are making the leap today to address it and make sure that they have a sound structure in place to support the business from an FP&A standpoint. So please feel free to book your free budgeting and forecasting assessment, crgroup.com/better-budgeting. There's a form to fill out, and please feel free to fill it out, and then we can have a conversation around that. Well, thank you very much. And we have a couple questions here that I will address. So first question is, do all these solutions support varying ERPs? If I understand this correctly, so I think the question's around accounting systems, and I hope I'm answering this correctly, but as far as what the question is, each solution that we looked at, so IDU, Workday, Board, they all integrate to virtually most ERPs to varying degree. So there's different integration approaches, but generally speaking, the answer is yes. There's just different ways to get the data integrated into the system. Typically, we go with always solutions that have options available to you, whether it's direct integration, automating flat file loads, things of that nature. All right, so I wish I could answer more questions. There's a couple. I will do some follow-ups after this, but we are at the bottom of the webinar. Thank you for attending. Please do feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and to fill out that particular form if you want to have an assessment around your existing processes. All right, well, thank you very much, and have a great day.